What if the storm that broke you was the only way to make you whole again? Picture a man, once a hero, now a shadow of himself, standing on a weathered pier as the ocean whispers memories of his greatest failure. Ethan Carter, a retired Coast Guard pilot with over 2,000 flight hours, gazes at the waves crashing against the shore, his weathered hands gripping the railing. 3 years ago, a failed hover in a hurricane claimed 3 of his crew, shattering his confidence and leaving him to teach basic aviation at a tiny coastal airport. His mind, though, remains trapped in that stormy night. Can you feel the weight of his guilt? The cold sting of regret as the wind howls around him? A crackling weather radio interrupts his solitude, its urgent voice echoing the same deadly conditions he faced before. Ethan mutes it, his throat tightening, but the call lingers in the air, a haunting echo of the past. Welcome to Daily Narrated Stories. I'm thrilled to share Ethan's tale of courage and redemption with you. His seaside cottage, nestled on a lonely bay, holds only one decoration, a faded photo of his lost crew, their faces a daily reminder of what he couldn't save. Each morning, Ethan runs 5 miles along the shore, the sand cold beneath his sneakers, sips coffee on his porch as the gulls cry overhead, then heads to the airport to teach students the safest, simplest maneuvers, no risks, no danger. Perfect flying weather, he tells his student, forcing a smile under a clear blue sky, the kind of sky that promises safety, not storms. But his phone buzzes relentlessly, Coast Guard command. A capsized yacht, 30 civilians, hurricane conditions. They need him. What would you do if you were Ethan? Would you answer the call and face your fears, or stay safe and let others handle it? Comment 1 for facing the storm, or 2 for staying behind, and let's see what you'd choose. While you're at it, please subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to us. Ethan's drive to the Coast Guard station feels like a descent into a past he's tried to bury, each mile a step closer to the storm that broke him. His phone burns in his pocket with the message, capsized yacht, 30 civilians, Hurricane Nora, no other precision pilots available. The words sear into his mind, each syllable a reminder of the night he lost everything. He grips the steering wheel of his weathered truck, the leather creaking under his fingers, as the coastal road stretches endlessly before him. The sky darkens with the approaching storm, clouds swirling like the guilt in his chest. He can almost hear Sam's laughter, his old rescue swimmer's voice echoing from a memory of a calmer day, when they'd shared a thermos of coffee on this very road, joking about the rookie pilots back at base. "You're the best, Carter," Sam had said, clapping him on the shoulder. "No one hovers like you." That memory stings now, a cruel contrast to the screams that followed years later. Ethan's breath catches as he passes a faded sign for the station, its paint peeling like the layers of his resolve. What if he fails again? What if more lives are lost because of him? The weight of the decision presses down, heavier than the storm clouds above. At the hangar, Captain Hayes greets him with a grim nod, his weathered face etched with the same urgency Ethan remembers from 3 years ago. "Didn't think you'd show, Carter," Hayes says, his voice heavy with the weight of the situation. The hangar smells of fuel and salt, a scent that floods Ethan with memories of his last mission, the roar of the storm, the screams of his crew, Sam, Elena, and Marcus. Their names surface unbidden as he scans the familiar space, his eyes lingering on the equipment lockers where Sam used to stash his lucky socks, swearing they'd get him through any mission. Elena's locker still has a sticker of a sunflower, her favorite flower, faded but clinging to the metal. Marcus's locker is bare, just like his quiet demeanor, but Ethan can still picture the man's steady hand checking the chopper's systems before every flight. "It's bad, Ethan," Hayes continues, pulling him back to the present. Yacht flipped 15 miles offshore. Hurricane Nora is a Category 3, winds at 90 knots, 15-foot seas. Nearest ships are hours away. "We need your hover, the one you pulled off in Hurricane Leo." Ethan's chest tightens, his pulse racing as if he's already in the storm. That hover had made him a legend, a story still told in training rooms, but the one that followed had taken everything. He can still feel the helicopter's sudden drop, the way the controls went slack in his hands, the icy dread as he realized he couldn't save them. Sam's voice had crackled through the radio, "I'm going down, Carter," followed by Elena's scream, sharp and desperate, and Marcus's silence, a void that spoke louder than any cry. Ethan's hands clench into fists, nails digging into his palms as he fights the urge to run. Ethan closes his eyes, the memory of that night 3 years ago crashing over him like the waves outside. The helicopter had plummeted after a hydraulic failure, and Sam had been the first to fall, his safety line snapping like a thread in the wind. Elena's scream had cut through the radio, a sound that still wakes Ethan in the dead of night, her voice pleading for him to hold the hover just a second longer. Marcus had been last, his silence the worst of all. Ethan had known he was gone before the radio went quiet. The investigation had cleared Ethan of blame, citing mechanical failure, but the faces of their families at the memorial had branded him with guilt. Sam's wife had clutched a pair of those lucky socks, tears streaming down her face. Elena's brother had stared at Ethan with hollow eyes, unable to speak. Marcus's daughter, only 5, had given Ethan a drawing, a stick-figure helicopter with "Thank you for trying" scrawled in crayon. That drawing still sits in a drawer at home, a reminder of what he couldn't do. "I can't do that again," Ethan whispers, his heart pounding so hard he's sure Hayes can hear it. Hayes' voice softens, his eyes searching Ethan's face. "Those people will die without you. But I won't force you." Ethan's gaze drifts to the flight suits on the wall, their fabric worn but ready, a silent challenge. His name is gone from his old locker, erased like his confidence, but the emergency protocols are unchanged, etched into his muscle memory. He can still recite them in his sleep. Every switch, every procedure, every second that could mean life or death. The storm outside howls, a mirror to the chaos in his mind. What if he says no? What if he says yes? The faces of 30 strangers flash through his thoughts, their lives hanging on his choice. Ethan hesitates, his hand hovering over a flight suit, the fabric rough under his fingertips. His name may be gone, but the suit fits like a second skin, its weight both foreign and familiar. "Who's my crew?" he asks, the words tasting like fear, sharp and metallic on his tongue. "Riley, co-pilot, she's sharp but green in hurricanes." "Bennett, rescue swimmer, he's the best we've got," Hayes replies, his tone steady but urgent. Ethan nods, the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like an old, heavy coat, one he'd thought he'd never wear again. He zips up the suit, the sound loud in the quiet hangar, each tooth of the zipper a step closer to the storm. His fingers fumble, betraying the anxiety that coils in his gut like a living thing. He can still walk away, drive back to his cottage, sip coffee on the porch, and pretend the call never came. But the photo of his old crew flashes in his mind, their faces a silent plea. Don't let it happen again. Riley and Bennett are waiting, their lives now in his hands, just as Sam, Elena, and Marcus had been. The thought of failing them, of adding more names to his nightmares, makes his stomach churn. But the thought of 30 people drowning, their families left to grieve as he had grieved, is worse. He adjusts the suit's collar, the fabric scratching against his neck, and takes a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of jet fuel and salt. He's not ready, but he's here. In the ready room, Ethan studies the weather maps, Hurricane Nora's swirling mass a mirror of his past nightmare. The radar screen glows with a blinking icon marking the capsized yacht, its position a taunting red dot amidst the storm's chaos. Winds gust at 90 knots, seas at 15 feet, conditions that could tear a helicopter apart. Ethan traces the storm's counterclockwise rotation with a trembling finger, calculating their approach. He's done this 100 times before, but never with so much at stake or so much fear. The maps blur as another memory surfaces, the night of the crash, when he'd stared at a similar map, Sam leaning over his shoulder with a grin. "We've got this, Carter," Sam had said, his confidence infectious. But they hadn't had it, not that night. Ethan blinks, forcing the memory down, and focuses on the present. Riley enters, her eyes widening as she recognizes him. "You're Carter? The precision hover legend? They said you quit flying." Her voice is a mix of awe and disbelief, and Ethan feels the weight of his reputation like a physical thing. "I did," he mutters, pointing to the map. "We'll approach from the southeast, better winds there. This mission's got an 80% chance of failure, Riley. Back out now if you want." Riley squares her shoulders, her jaw set. "I'm in. Those people need us." Her determination mirrors Elena's, and Ethan feels a pang of both pride and dread. He can't lose another crew, not again. Ethan turns to the equipment locker, his hands moving automatically as he selects the gear he's used hundreds of times before. The helmet's weight is familiar, its visor scratched from years of use. Each mark a story of a life saved or lost. He adjusts the radio headset, the earpiece crackling to life with static that sounds too much like the storm outside. The survival vest, with its emergency beacon, feels heavier than it should, as if it's carrying the ghosts of his past. He clips it on, the straps digging into his shoulders, a reminder of the burden he's chosen to bear. Riley watches him, her own gear in hand, her movements precise but nervous. "You've done this before," she says, more to herself than to him. "Hundreds of times," Ethan replies, his voice hollow. "But never like this," he thinks. "Never with the memory of failure so fresh, so raw." He points to the map again, his fingers steady despite the tremor in his chest. "The hurricane's rotation gives us a slight advantage from the southeast. We'll need to maintain communication with the survivors, if possible." His voice is calm, professional, but inside, he's screaming. What if the radio fails again? What if he can't hear their cries? The thought of silence, of not knowing if they're alive or dead, terrifies him more than the storm itself. Bennett, the rescue swimmer, joins them, his calm demeanor a painful echo of Sam's. He's a broad-shouldered man with steady eyes, the kind of person you trust with your life, and Ethan will have to. "I've studied your hover technique," Bennett says, his voice respectful. "They still teach it in training. Never thought I'd see it live." Ethan's throat tightens, the words a double-edged sword. "Don't expect miracles," he thinks, but he forces a nod. "This is going to be rough," he warns, his voice low. Bennett reminds him so much of Sam. The same quiet confidence, the same readiness to dive into danger. Sam had been the heart of their team, always lightening the mood with a joke or a story. Once, during a training exercise, Sam had surfaced from a mock rescue with a grin, holding up a crab he'd caught with his bare hands. "Dinner's on me," he'd laughed, and even Marcus had cracked a rare smile. Now, Bennett's presence feels like a ghost, a reminder of what Ethan lost and what he can't lose again. He checks his gear one last time, the routine grounding him, but the storm outside grows louder, its howl seeping through the walls like a warning. Walking to the helicopter pad, Ethan's steps feel heavier with each memory flash. Sam's laughter, Elena's steady voice, Marcus's quiet courage. The wind whips at his flight suit, the fabric snapping against his legs, and he can taste the salt in the air, sharp and bitter. The Jayhawk sits on the pad, rotors already turning, its sleek frame a stark contrast to the chaos brewing on the horizon. Ethan runs his hand along its fuselage, a ritual to ground himself, the metal cool and smooth under his palm. He remembers the first time he flew this model, years ago, with Sam in the back, cracking jokes over the headset. "She's a beauty, Carter," Sam had said, patting the chopper's side. "She'll take care of us." But she hadn't, not that night. Riley notices Ethan's hesitation, her brow furrowing. "You okay, sir?" "Not a sir anymore," Ethan replies, his voice rough. "Focus on your instruments out there. Nothing else matters." He climbs into the cockpit, the seat molding to his body like an old friend, but the familiarity brings no comfort, only dread. Settling into the pilot's seat, Ethan runs the checklist with Riley, his voice steadier than his nerves. The cockpit smells of metal and electronics, a sterile contrast to the storm waiting outside. "Hydraulics normal," Riley confirms, her voice steady but her hands gripping the clipboard a little too tightly. "Fuel full," comms open. Ethan adjusts his headset, the static crackling like a storm within a storm. The tower clears them. Rescue 6501, takeoff approved. Winds at target now 85 knots, gusting to 100. Ethan's hands tighten on the controls, the collective smooth under his palm, the cyclic responsive to his touch. He can still feel the ghost of that other flight, the way the controls had betrayed him, slipping from his grip as the chopper fell. He pushes the thought down, focusing on the present, on the lives depending on him. The Jayhawk lifts off, the ground falling away as they climb, the station shrinking below them. Ethan guides the chopper forward, accelerating toward the darkening horizon, his heart pounding in time with the rotors. Hurricane Nora's storm wall looms like a fortress of gray rage, a towering barrier between them and the survivors. The sky ahead is a mass of swirling clouds, lightning flickering within like a beast waiting to strike. "Riley, watch the radar." "Bennett, double-check your gear." Ethan orders, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air in the cockpit. The chopper vibrates as they hit the outer bands of the hurricane, the frame rattling with each gust. Ethan's hands tighten on the controls, his knuckles white, as he prepares for the worst. They plunge into the storm, rain hammering the windshield with a force that sounds like gunfire, visibility dropping to nothing. The world outside becomes a blur of gray and black, The rain's so thick it's like flying through a waterfall. Ethan squints through the downpour, his eyes burning with the effort, but there's nothing to see. Only the storm, endless and merciless. Heading 045, wind sheer from the northeast, Riley reports, her voice tight with concentration. Vessel 2 miles ahead. Ethan grips the controls, making micro-adjustments as the Jayhawk bucks against the gusts, each movement a battle against the storm's fury. A sudden pitch sends warning lights flickering on the console. What's failing now? The chopper shudders violently, the frame groaning under the strain, and Ethan's heart leaps into his throat. He corrects their course, his hands moving instinctively, muscle memory taking over where fear threatens to paralyze him. The storm's roar is deafening, even through the headset, a primal scream that drowns out everything else. Ethan can feel the wind pushing against them, a living force trying to tear them apart. He glances at Riley, her face pale but focused, her fingers flying across the instruments. "We're holding," she says, but her voice wavers, betraying her fear. Ethan nods, his jaw clenched, as he fights to keep the chopper stable, every second a test of his skill and his courage. Radar showing the capsized vessel 2 miles ahead. Riley continues, her voice steadying as she focuses on the task. Ethan nods, his world narrowing to the instruments before him and the feel of the aircraft beneath his hands. The Jayhawk pitches again as a gust slams into them, the force so strong it feels like a physical blow. Warning lights flicker momentarily on the console, a brief flash of red that sends a jolt of panic through Ethan. "Just like old times," he mutters, correcting their course, his hands moving before his mind can catch up. He can't afford to think about the past. Not now, not with 30 lives on the line. Bennett leans forward from the rear compartment, his voice calm but urgent. Command reports survivors are clustered on the hull. Water temperature is 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia will be setting in. Ethan's stomach knots, the words a chilling echo of 3 years ago. He remembers the report from that night. The same water temperature, the same ticking clock, the same lives depending on his skill. He pushes the memory down, focusing on the present, on the lives he can still save. Riley switches to thermal imaging, the screen between them flickering to life with ghostly white shapes against the dark water. "We won't see them visually in this, Ethan," she says, her voice tight. 30 heat signatures clustered on the yacht's hull. There they are. Some signatures are weaker than others, fading like candles in the wind, and Ethan feels a cold dread settle in his chest. "We need to move fast," Riley adds, her eyes fixed on the screen. Ethan begins the approach, positioning the helicopter upwind of the capsized vessel, the Jayhawk fighting him with every gust. Sweat drips down his face despite the cabin's chill, his flight suit clinging to his skin. The storm's fury is relentless, the winds gusting to 100 knots, the chopper's frame vibrating under the strain. "Bennett, prepare for deployment," Ethan orders, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Riley, monitor power levels. We're going to hover at 50 feet. He can feel the weight of the moment, the same maneuver that failed before, the same stakes that broke him. His breathing quickens, his chest tight with the memory of that other storm. But he forces himself to focus, to breathe, to fly. Ethan feels a cold knot form in his stomach as the capsized yacht comes into view through breaks in the rain. A white hull overturned in churning seas, people clinging to it like ants on a leaf. Some wave desperately as they spot the helicopter, their movements frantic, their hope a fragile thing in the face of the storm. Below, Anna, a grandmother, clutches the hull with numb fingers, her thoughts on her grandson, Tommy, back home. She'd promised him a fishing trip next summer, a day of laughter and sunshine on the lake. She can still see his gap-toothed smile, hear his giggle as he'd hugged her goodbye. "Be safe, Nana," he'd said, and she'd promised she would. Now, her promise feels like a lie, the cold seeping into her bones, her strength fading with each wave that crashes over her. She spots the helicopter, its lights cutting through the storm like a lifeline, and whispers a prayer, her voice lost in the wind. Ethan watches the survivors, their desperation a mirror to his own fear, and feels the weight of their lives in his hands. He can't fail them, not like he failed Sam, Elena, and Marcus. A particularly violent gust rocks the helicopter, and for a moment, Ethan is back in that other storm. The mechanical failure, the sudden drop, the screams. Sam's voice echoes in his mind. "I'm going down, Carter," followed by Elena's scream, sharp and desperate, and Marcus's silence, a void that still haunts him. "We're drifting, need correction." Riley's voice cuts through his flashback, pulling him back to the present. Ethan blinks, refocusing on the instruments, his hands moving to adjust the collective. "Copy that," he says, his voice steadier than he feels. The capsized yacht is directly below them now, the survivors' faces upturned, their hope a fragile light in the darkness. Ethan begins the hover sequence, easing the collective, the Jayhawk responding despite the storm's fury. The chopper settles into position above the wreck, the maneuver as familiar as breathing, and as terrifying as death. "This is it," Ethan announces, his voice steady despite the memory threatening to overwhelm him. "Power fluctuating," Riley reports, her eyes fixed on the gauges. Wind gusts approaching 100 knots. Ethan forces himself to breathe slowly, his hands steady on the controls. This isn't the same aircraft, he tells himself. This isn't the same day. He can do this. "Bennett, stand by for deployment," he says, his voice calm but firm. "Riley, give me constant altitude readings." The helicopter hovers precariously, fighting against the hurricane's fury, every muscle in Ethan's body tense with concentration. 52 feet and holding, Riley confirms, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. "You're doing it, Ethan." Below, the survivors watch with desperate hope as the rescue basket begins its descent, the cable swaying in the wind, a fragile thread between life and death. Ethan's world narrows to the instruments before him and the feel of the aircraft beneath his hands, every slight drift, every gust, every vibration demanding an immediate response. The storm's roar is a constant assault, the rain a relentless drumbeat against the windshield. "First contact made," Bennett reports through the radio. "I count 27 survivors visible, 3 appear unconscious." Ethan nods, his jaw clenched as he holds the hover, the chopper's engines straining against the hurricane-force winds. "Copy that," he responds, his voice steady despite the sweat soaking his flight suit. Beginning extraction sequence. Below, Bennett secures the first survivor, Anna, the grandmother, into the rescue basket, her frail body trembling as she clutches the straps. She looks up at the helicopter, her eyes meeting Ethan's through the rain-streaked windshield, and he sees the flicker of hope in her gaze. It's a look he's seen before, a look he couldn't fulfill 3 years ago, and it drives him to hold the hover, to fight the storm, to be the hero he once was. The helicopter's engines strain, the power gauges fluctuating into the yellow zone, dangerously close to the red line. "Fuel at 38 minutes remaining at current burn rate," Riley reports, her eyes fixed on her instruments. Engine temperature rising, but within limits. Ethan makes another correction as a gust pushes them sideways, the chopper tilting dangerously. Below, Bennett has secured Anna in the basket, her gray hair plastered to her face, her lips moving in a silent prayer. "First survivor ready for lift," Bennett calls, his voice crackling through the radio. Ethan nods to Riley, who begins operating the hoist, the basket rising slowly through the driving rain, swinging in the wind like a pendulum. Ethan watches the power gauges, his heart in his throat, knowing how close they are to failure, how close he is to losing everything again. A sudden downdraft hits the helicopter, dropping them 15 feet in an instant, the aircraft shuddering violently. Warning alarms blare through the cockpit, a piercing wail that cuts through the storm's roar. "Power loss in engine 2. Riley calls out, her fingers flying across the emergency controls, her voice sharp with panic. The basket with Anna swings dangerously close to the water, the cable straining under the sudden shift. Ethan's vision tunnels, the alarms, the sudden drop, the chaos. It's exactly like before. He's back in that other storm, the night he lost his crew, the night he failed. Sam's scream echoes in his mind. "I'm going down, Carter," followed by Elena's desperate cry, and Marcus's silence, a void that swallowed them all. The investigation had blamed a hydraulic failure, but Ethan had blamed himself, the weight of their deaths a burden he's carried every day since. He can still see their faces, their trust in him, their belief that he'd bring them home. He'd failed them, and now he's failing again. Ethan's hands freeze on the controls as the past and present merge. The storm outside a mirror to the storm within. He's back in that cockpit 3 years ago, the Jayhawk plummeting, the controls useless in his hands. Sam had been the first to fall, his safety line snapping, his voice crackling through the radio with a final, "I'm sorry, Carter." Elena had screamed, her voice a desperate plea as she tried to hold on, her hands slipping on the harness. Marcus had been last, his silence a confirmation of the worst. Ethan had known he was gone before the radio went quiet. The investigation had been a blur, the faces of their families a gallery of grief. Sam's wife had clutched those lucky socks, her sobs echoing in the quiet room. Elena's brother had stared at Ethan with hollow eyes, unable to speak. Marcus's daughter had given him that drawing, her tiny hand trembling as she handed it over. "We're losing altitude." Riley's voice cuts through the flashback, her words a lifeline pulling him back to the present. The helicopter continues to descend, now 30 feet from the churning waves, the basket with Anna swinging dangerously close to the water. Ethan blinks, forcing himself back to the present, his training taking over where fear threatens to paralyze him. "Switching to backup hydraulics," he says, his voice steady despite the chaos, his hands moving with a precision honed by years of experience. He adjusts the collective, redirecting power from the functioning engine, his movements swift and sure. "Riley, monitor engine 1 temperature. We're going to be pushing it hard." The Jayhawk stabilizes at 40 feet, still in hover position above the capsized yacht, the basket with Anna rising slowly toward the cabin door. Ethan's heart hammers against his ribs, but he forces himself to focus, to breathe, to fly. He can't fail, not again. Riley pulls Anna inside, her frail body trembling as she collapses into the cabin, her lips blue but her eyes alive with gratitude. "First survivor secured," Riley reports, her voice a mix of relief and tension. "Bennett is preparing the second." Ethan nods, sweat soaking his flight suit as he fights to maintain position, the helicopter vibrating under the strain but holding. "Engine 1 at 92% capacity," Riley warns, her voice tight. Temperature approaching limits. One by one, Bennett sends survivors up in the basket, a young boy shivering uncontrollably, his small hands clutching the straps, his eyes wide with fear. A man with a gash across his forehead, blood mixing with rainwater as he grimaces in pain. A teenage girl clutching her younger brother, her arms wrapped around him like a shield. With each successful extraction, Ethan's confidence grows, the hover maneuver working despite the hurricane, despite the engine failure, despite his fear. He's doing what they said couldn't be done, what he thought he'd never do again. The storm rages on, the winds howling, the rain relentless, but Ethan holds the hover, his hands steady, his focus absolute. He can feel Sam, Elena, and Marcus watching him, their presence a quiet encouragement, a reminder of why he's here. 17 survivors on board, Riley updates, her voice steady but urgent. 7 more to go. Ethan glances at the fuel gauge, 22 minutes remaining. "We need to speed this up," he says, his voice firm. Below, the capsized yacht is riding lower in the water, the hull sinking with each wave that crashes over it, threatening to disappear entirely. The survivors cling to the wreckage, their movements sluggish, their strength fading as the cold takes its toll. Ethan watches them, his heart aching with the weight of their lives, the weight of his past. He can't lose them, not like he lost his crew. He adjusts the hover, compensating for another gust, the chopper's frame groaning under the strain. The storm's fury is unrelenting, the winds gusting to 105 knots, the rain a solid wall of water that obscures everything. Ethan's hands ache from gripping the controls, his muscles burning with the effort, but he doesn't let go. He can't. "Ethan, look out!" Riley shouts as a massive wave crashes over the yacht, washing 2 survivors into the sea. "Bennett, 2 in the water, 11 o'clock position." Ethan calls through the radio, his voice sharp with urgency. Without hesitation, Bennett releases his safety line and dives into the churning sea, his form disappearing into the waves. Ethan adjusts the hover position, tracking Bennett's movement in the water, his heart pounding as he watches the swimmer fight the current. Below, the 2 survivors struggle to stay afloat, their arms flailing, their heads barely above the surface. One is a woman, her dark hair plastered to her face, her screams swallowed by the storm as she fights to keep her head above water. The other is a man, his movements sluggish, his body limp as the cold saps his strength. Bennett reaches the woman first, securing her with a rescue strap, his movements swift despite the waves crashing over him. He swims toward the man, his strokes powerful but strained, the storm fighting him every inch of the way. "Riley, keep eyes on our swimmer," Ethan orders, fighting the controls as another gust slams into them. Through the rain-streaked window, he watches Bennett secure the second survivor, the man now unconscious, his head lolling against Bennett's shoulder. "Fuel at 18 minutes, Riley reports, her voice tight. "Engine 1 temperature critical." Ethan makes a split-second decision, his voice calm but firm. "We're going lower. Prepare for descent to 30 feet. "That's below safety minimum in these conditions," Riley warns, her eyes wide. "I know," Ethan replies, already easing the helicopter down, the rotors creating violent downdrafts that temporarily clear visibility to the water below. The Jayhawk descends through the howling wind, the storm's fury a physical force pushing against them, the chopper's frame shuddering with the effort. At 30 feet, the rotors whip the water into a frenzy, the downdrafts creating a small circle of clarity in the chaos. Bennett looks up, his face pale but determined, and radios, both survivors secured, ready for extraction. A warning light flashes on the console, hydraulic pressure dropping, the same warning that had preceded the catastrophic failure 3 years ago. Ethan feels his heart hammering against his ribs, his vision starting to narrow as the flashback threatens to return. He's back in that other storm, the night he lost his crew, the night he failed. The hydraulic failure had come without warning, the chopper dropping like a stone. Sam screamed the last thing he'd heard before the crash. Ethan takes a deep breath, focusing entirely on the present moment, the feel of the controls, the sound of the engines, the lives depending on him. "Switching to tertiary systems," he says calmly, his voice a stark contrast to the chaos around him. "Riley, prepare for emergency power routing." The helicopter shudders, but maintains position, the cable straining as it lifts Bennett and both survivors from the water, the storm's fury a constant assault. Bennett and the 2 survivors reach the cabin door, where Riley and one of the stronger passengers help pull them inside. "Final survivors on board," Riley confirms, her voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. "Bennett is secure. We're full up." Ethan feels a wave of relief wash over him, but it's short-lived. The storm isn't done with them yet. "Command, this is Rescue 6501. Ethan radios, his voice steady despite the strain. All 30 survivors recovered, returning to base with critical mechanical issues. He eases the collective up, raising the helicopter away from the churning sea, the Jayhawk groaning under the weight of the extra passengers but responding to his commands. Turning to heading 270, he announces, his hands steady on the controls. "Riley, monitor engine temperature. We'll need to fly manual control the entire way back." As they clear the worst of the storm, Ethan allows himself a moment to breathe, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He's done it. The same maneuver that had haunted his nightmares for 3 years has just saved 30 lives. In the cabin behind him, survivors huddle together under emergency blankets, their faces pale but alive, their voices a soft murmur of gratitude. Anna clutches the young boy's hand, her lips moving in a silent prayer of thanks, her thoughts on her grandson, Tommy, and the fishing trip she'll now live to take him on. The teenage girl holds her brother close, tears streaming down her face as she whispers, "We made it." Ethan can't hear their words, but he feels their relief, their hope, their second chance. Medical personnel will be waiting when they land, and every person will go home to their families because he faced his deepest fear. 40 minutes later, the Coast Guard station comes into view, a beacon of safety through the fading storm. Ethan guides the struggling Jayhawk toward the landing pad, emergency crews waiting below with stretchers and blankets, their figures small but determined. The chopper's frame vibrates with the strain, the engine temperature in the red, the warning lights a constant flicker on the console. "Nice and easy," Ethan murmurs to himself, his voice a quiet mantra as he eases the chopper down, the skids hovering just above the tarmac. The moment they touch down, the warning lights flash one final time, and the engine shuts down completely, the sudden silence a stark contrast to the storm's roar. Perfect timing, Riley says, looking at Ethan with newfound respect, her voice trembling with relief. Another minute in the air, and we'd have dropped like a stone. Ethan nods, his hands finally releasing their death grip on the controls, his fingers aching from the effort. The cabin door opens, and medical teams rush in to help the survivors, their voices a flurry of activity as they assess injuries and wrap blankets around shivering bodies. Ethan watches as Anna is helped onto a stretcher, her frail hand reaching out to touch the arm of a medic, her lips forming the words, "Thank you." The young boy clings to a paramedic, his small body shaking but alive, his eyes bright with the promise of tomorrow. Ethan feels a lump in his throat, the weight of their survival a balm to the wounds he's carried for so long. Underscore, underscore, underscore. Conclusion. Captain Hayes approaches as Ethan steps out, his boots heavy on the tarmac, the rain still dripping from his flight suit. "That was the finest flying I've ever seen, Carter," Hayes says, his eyes shining with pride. "The hover worked, you proved it." Ethan nods, watching the last survivor, Anna, being carried to safety. She turns, her eyes meeting his, and mouths, "Thank you." In that moment, the burden of 3 years, Sam, Elena, Marcus, feels lighter. He'll never forget them, but now he has 30 reasons to remember what he can do. What would you hold on to in a storm? Hope, fear, or a promise to someone you love? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how Ethan's journey resonates with you. Ethan looks at the battered Jayhawk, a mirror of his own scars, its paint chipped, but its spirit unbroken. "Will we see you back tomorrow?" Hayes asks, a hopeful note in his voice. Ethan smiles faintly, the first real smile he's felt in years. "Maybe. Someone's got to teach these kids how to fly." He's not healed, but he's whole enough to try again. This story of courage and redemption reminds us that our deepest fears can lead to our greatest triumphs. A message Daily Narrated Stories is proud to share, inspiring and uplifting through every tale. If Ethan's journey moved you, don't wait. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories now. We're racing to 1,000 subscribers, and your support will help us keep sharing stories that change lives. Tap that like button, comment your favorite moment, and share this video with someone who needs a spark of hope. Time's fleeting. Be part of our community today.